It's nice to be back. I haven't been here for, 2-3 weeks, I think. It's been, a long time. We had a furnace outage and other adjustments to make. Before I start, I wanted to make an announcement, especially to those on our broadcast. Next Sunday, we will be experiencing our annual conference. So if you would like to attend the conference by Zoom through the internet, go to White Mountain's website, www.wmea-world.org. And you'll see at the bottom of the home page, there's a beautiful painting by Nicholas Rourke, which is clickable, and that will take you to the conference website, and you can register. We have 2 days left before registration closes. So if you want to attend next Sunday's broadcast, register for the conference. It's donation only. So we have such incredibly, beautifully, highly knowledgeable, expert presenters on Agni Yoga. And if you really are following Agni Yoga, it would be terrible to miss it. I'm not kidding. This is not a promotion of the group. It's a promotion of the teaching. And the nice thing about these Zoom conferences is that they can be recorded. So every presentation will be recorded, in a few days after conference. I guess these recordings have to be rendered and prepared for YouTube and then posted. So if you're registered and you cannot attend all of those presentations, you can watch the YouTube video later. So we encourage you to register. You have 2 more days before registration closes. So this morning, I'm talking about the foundation of life, Agni Yoga and the foundation of life. The Buddha tells a story about a family of acrobats. He said a grandfather and granddaughter traveled and made their living by performing balancing acts. They came to the Buddha to discuss what was the best way to safeguard and to care for each other, to strengthen the foundation of each other so they would be safe and well. The grandfather put forth the idea that each should care for the other, that he should care for his granddaughter in the balancing, and she should take care of him. Thus they would protect each other. The granddaughter asked the Buddha if that was not backward. Would it not be better, she said, for each of us to care for ourselves? And in that way, we best safeguard each other, and our acrobats will prosper. Well, after listening to the little girl, the Buddha replied, though she is young, she is wise. If you as a grandfather, he said, guard yourself with care and pay attention to what you do, you will also guard the safety of your grandchild. And if you do, as a child, guard yourself with such awareness, with care, with respect, then you guard both yourself and those around you. So he's telling us part of our foundation requires balance, and taking care of ourselves and one another creates balance. Balance is strengthening our foundation. So that's the opening to this morning's talk, to think about, is my life in balance? Because balance and equilibrium strengthens our foundation. Now, this is interesting. In the book, Lisa Moria's Garden, it's the second volume, Illumination, pages 144 and 145, there is a well-known paragraph, and I'm going to read that paragraph to you, where Master M says this. He says, "Friends, place 4 stones into the foundation of your actions." Do you recognize this? First, he says, the first stone is the reverence of hierarchy. The reverence of hierarchy. The second stone is the realization of unity. Reverence for hierarchy, realization of unity. And the third is the realization of co-measurement. And I'll be talking about these later on. And the fourth stone is application of the canon by thy God. So those are the 4 stones that we must put into the foundation of our actions. So the first point to consider in this verse is the word foundation. It is important that every single one of us has a good foundation. To me, what is, as I was putting together this talk, I discovered that I did have a foundation. I never would have said I have a foundation. We don't think like that. Not until we are wise and mature enough to recognize something's missing, and that something missing is a foundation. But if your life is built on a foundation, it's just normal for you. It is a process through which you live your life, and any time there is a crack in that foundation, you recognize it and you heal it, or you reconstruct whatever caused the breakage in your foundation. But not everybody has a good foundation. Not everybody started their childhood with a good foundation. But it is important that every single person has a good foundation to live a successful life. With a good foundation, our actions, our decisions, thoughts, and feelings. These are 4 terms that are important. Actions, feelings, decisions, and thoughts are the actions that will be right, and our foundation will survive. We must have a foundation for everything we do. So we take these 4 stones that create a wall for our foundation, and then the activity are these 4 points: actions, decisions, thoughts, and feelings. In the early years of our life, if we had good caregivers that gave us a good foundation, think about what that foundation was. What kind of foundation did your parents or your caregivers give you that now, as an adult, is reaping its reward? Think about it. Were you given protection, stability, a sense of family unity and joy and beauty? Did you have a peaceful environment through which you grew? Was a sense of self-worth instilled in you? Did your parents help you discover how to live a purposeful life? And so forth. All of these points went into the construction of your foundation as you went from childhood through teenage, if you got through the teenage years without being in trouble, and on into your 20s and so forth. Foundation is the principles or ideals that we accept. The principles or ideas of which we accept. That when we accept certain principles and ideals as our foundation, now our actions are going to follow a blueprint for this foundation. Do you see how these pieces are all coming together now? It's so interesting to me to think about having a foundation. This is not something that we're instructed or educated about, when we're young. We're just not. It's just not part of the process of life that our parents were taught to raise their kids with the foundation, because they weren't taught. It's almost you either had a good foundation or you didn't. You had wise parents or a wise caregiver, or you didn't. It wasn't discussed. Having a good foundation was not discussed, at least not in my generation. It was not. So I love this talk. I think it's significant, even if you're 90 years old, to really think about the foundation of your life. Do you have one or not? A foundation does not mean that we are limited in our activity or that we are limited in our thinking. It means we have strong principles. See, sometimes it's like the term foundation has a numerical symbol to it, which is 4. 4 is a square, right? And a square, to most of us, is limiting. When we think of a foundation, we think of the 4 walls or the 4 sides, and that seems limiting, but it's not. So don't fall into that trap of thinking that I don't want a foundation because then I'm limited in my activities. Foundation means to have strong principles, strong goals, and purpose behind our thinking. For example, when you are speaking, do you have a plan? I bet you 50% of the time you don't, maybe 90% of the time you don't. But this is Agni Yoga teaching us how to speak, and the process of speaking asks from us that we have a plan, a purpose, and a principle. When we speak, does it have a plan, a purpose, and is it significant to our foundation? Our foundation can have cracks in it. But if we become, like let's say we become slack in the way we speak with one another, or we become slack in the choices that we make in our relationships, well, these cracks can be filled in if we practice right action. And in this case, right action is when you are speaking, do you have a plan, a purpose, or a principle? If so, then you have a foundation. It is like building a house and placing it on a strong foundation. So the house stands and lasts for a very long time. Unless you live in California on a mountainside, the foundation will still be there, but the ground is not. So I have put a little humor in that, just to help us think about what a foundation is. We must have a strong foundation, because if we do not, then our thinking, our emotions, our speech and actions, we're still going to have emotions and feelings and speech and actions, but they're not going to bring the results that we wanted. To have such a foundation, now we're getting into the teaching where it says to have such a foundation, the teaching says we must have spiritual tension. Spiritual tension is to understand and to consider tension in relationship to a stringed instrument. This is the easiest way for me to explain what tension is. When the correct tension is placed on the string of a stringed instrument, like a violin, the string is not only correctly tuned to the soul note of the violin, or the solo note in the violin's case would be concert A. It is also in perfect resonance. The solo note is in perfect resonance with the instrument itself. A violin has a sound post, which is scientifically placed within the instrument. If the sound post is not in its correct position, even a masterpiece instrument will not manifest beautiful sounds, and sometimes no sound at all. The sound post is the foundation, in other words, of the instrument. So the strings must have the correct amount of tension to produce a pure note, or the spirit of the instrument. But if the sound post of the instrument is not in its correct position, then no matter what, the music produced will not be beautiful, will not be pure. To produce the most beautiful tone, both the instruments and the strings must be in perfect tension. This metaphor can easily be understood through the nature of a disciple. If you see yourself, or you striving to become a disciple of a certain degree, as a disciple, we must have our instrument in perfect order, in perfect spiritual tension, to express the beauty of our spirit. And in that expression, we find the purpose of our life, being successful. But what about a disciple who is lacking spiritual tension? When a stringed instrument sits for any amount of time, all the strings must be relaxed or slacked in order not to ruin both the instrument itself as well as the strings. So, in comparing this action to a human instrument, let's say, it is easy to understand why, and listen to this carefully, why spiritual tension is not needed for a person who is not striving or who is in a state of inertia. So if you are a disciple, if you are an aspirant, if you are striving on this path, particularly of Agni Yoga or the Ageless Wisdom, and you find people around you in opposite to what you are living your life, don't try to pigeonhole them into your life. Don't try to mold them or shape them in such a way that they'll reflect what you think they should be, because their violin is slacked. In other words, their soul is not awake yet. They're still, walking around, they're living, they're behaving, they're acting, they're doing things, but they're like, and we see people like this, they're automatons. They're not conscious. So it's not your job to make them conscious. You give them an example by who you are and how you live your life. And then at the right moment, at the right time in their life, an opportunity will be given to them. But don't put tension on them or spiritual tension in their life if their strings are slacked, if their strings are relaxed. In fact, it is much safer for the bodies and centers of that person not to be exposed to any spiritual tension. For their human mechanism, their bodies are relaxed so as not to damage, their future bodies, or to prevent damage to their human soul. It's like another example I think of. It was so horrifying to me that I'll never forget it, where I was in a conference where there was a newcomer to the teaching, attending the conference, and she loved meditation. She just loved the whole experience and process of meditation. The unfortunate point is that she did not have a meditation teacher. And so she was meditating hours. Where the rest of us were attending the conference schedule, she was in her room meditating. And by the end of that week, she was insane. Literally out of her mind. We had to get her home to her family. Her family, of course, then blamed the conference people for not taking care of, their family member. And they had to take her to what we called it Sarasota 5 North at the hospital, for people in mental health problems. So too much meditation, not following the rules of meditation, puts too much spiritual tension, on our bodies, on our glands and our centers. And it is better not to meditate until we have a meditation teacher and we can practice the rules of meditation safely. In other words, it is vital to keep our instrument in the right tension. Once the right tension is established, higher tensions or higher octaves can be safely experienced. When a human instrument is in spiritual tension or in perfect resonance with the higher octaves would be the teacher, would be the master, would be hierarchy, would be the ashram, then that human instrument becomes like a Stradivarius, a most beautiful spiritual instrument upon whose strings can be sung celestial music. It becomes a master instrument. We know people like this. They stand out. They don't have to stand in front of a microphone and speak out. They don't have to bring attention to themselves because their beauty speaks for them. That beautiful instrument they have become radiates celestial music, which is the music of the spheres. What is interesting, though, that even a Stradivarius violin or cello or viola, considered to be a masterpiece instrument, must be continuously cared for, or like a disciple, it will deteriorate and become worthless. This is important to hear because it happens. So, do you have a foundation? For example, the foundation of the White Mountain, WMEA, White Mountain Education Association, is to bring the teaching to humanity, to teach the principles of Agni Yoga to the world, to the old and young alike, and to create a spiritual environment for striving disciples. This is our job. This is creating a foundation. Perhaps your foundation is to bring light to humanity. Perhaps your foundation is to bring health to humanity, to bring peace and brotherhood to humanity. These are foundations. If you have them and your four walls, thinking, speaking, feeling, and acting, are based upon a strong foundation, your thinking, acting, feeling, and speech will be sound. They will survive and provide survival, health, and happiness for you. But if your foundation is not good, or if you do not have a foundation, then you do not have a well-planned building, a well-planned life of thinking and speaking and feeling and acting. So the teaching advises us to build a foundation to underlie our actions. So, okay, let's take the first stone, which is reverence of hierarchy. This is the first of the 4 cornerstones of our foundation, reverence of hierarchy. Now, I'm giving you a lot of words. I see some of you are falling asleep. I can't imagine. But listen, use your imagination. Think about hierarchy. Think about your reverence for hierarchy. And then think about your reverence as being one of the cornerstones of your foundation. The hierarchy is made up of those we sincerely worship and admire. And honestly, it's okay to worship and admire people. I know. We in this country particularly, we're so mentally, intellectually oriented to demonstrate worship and admiration for somebody almost makes us seem as a little, a little crazy, or young or immature. But if you're one who has worship and admiration for someone or something or the teaching, your life has a spirit that is so strong and powerful and radiant and beautiful that you are anything but, right? It is such a gift to have objects or people or the teaching in front of us or part of us that we can worship and admire. We sincerely accept them as ideals. These people, these great ones, these teachings that we worship and admire, we sincerely accept them as ideals, as our visions of the future. In other words, for this application, the hierarchy is the highest standard that we think and feel and believe. It is our highest standard. For example, the hierarchy is your teacher. The hierarchy is Christ. The hierarchy is Buddha. The name of the White Mountains Center, the center we're in here, the center we broadcast from, is called Isvara. We named it after the Rourke estate in St. Petersburg. Isvara means the Lord of the Mountain. Nicholas Rourke spent his childhood there. It was a suburban estate of his father. We place symbols of the 4 cornerstones within the center's sanctuary in various ways, and also placed important symbols of the teachings on the grounds, and instilled certain virtues in the etheric substance of our property. The sacredness of our property and sanctuary can be felt when you enter the property. The foundation was built on hard work, sacrificial service, and was dedicated to the great ones. To keep the property beautiful, many of you here can attest to this, that it takes continuous nurturing. Sometimes being out here all day long to make sure the furnace stays on. You have to be there to understand it. Labor and service. We engage in labor and service on a daily, weekly, monthly, and yearly basis. This keeps our foundation strong. The foundation must be continuously cared for. The 4 corners in the verse suggest that we must keep to our commitments, for if we do not, then our lives can walk backward. Our lives will be found swimming in the dust of world pollution. We can find ourselves without direction, with chaos. For example, you make a decision, and then you change your mind. Then you make another decision. that takes you over there, and you change your mind again. Then you make a new decision that takes you over there and back and around again. Pretty soon you are 80 or 90 years old and out of time. Do you see? Eventually you will be surprised to realize that your feelings and thoughts and actions are building materials that you produce and which you use in the construction of your life. We must all consider whether we are building chaos or cosmos. I just recently watched the movie with Tom Hanks called Otto. It was actually kind of a depressing movie, but well acted because Tom Hanks was in it. And this is what happened. So, if you haven't watched the movie, is it what they call a spoiler alert? Mute yourself for a minute. Okay. Anyway, so his wife died. And he was so madly in love with his wife, and they lost a baby, and then she passed years later on from cancer. And after her passing, he became just a mean, ornery old man. But you can see he had a foundation. Now the foundation is cracked. But his foundation was that he described himself as a black and white person. Everything had a place, and there was a place for everything kind of human being. As a new Hispanic family moved into the neighborhood, the mother of the family, the matriarch of the family, which is it? Matron, either way, I guess. She couldn't have cared less about his mean, orneriness, old man self. She just loved him so much, and she just brought him around. She healed the crack in his foundation, and pretty soon this ornery old cat came into his house. He fed him 2 cans of tuna a day, and for it was at the end of his life, and he had heart problems. He had an enlarged heart, and he finally died. That's the spoiler alert. But the time that Hispanic woman and family and these young kids came into his life, they put his foundation back together again, and he helped the entire neighborhood put their lives back together as well. It was so beautiful. So, the purpose of this story is that if you have a crack in your foundation, it can be healed. If you build using this foundation stone, something very interesting occurs. You find yourself considering whether your thoughts and words and emotions and actions are coming from the source of realization of unity. This is the second stone, realization of unity. Helena Rourke told her students, I implore you, our own, find within yourselves the courage to conquer the chief inner enemy, disunion. It has built its nest within all. Let us tell ourselves that there can be no hypocrisy amidst the co-workers. And this was letters, I think it was in the second volume. She says, beloved ones, work unitedly without diminishing each other. Unitedly, the success of one co-worker is the success of another. People do not know what they are building, but eventually they will see that their life is very unhappy. An unhappy life is proof that one has built their house without a strong foundation. Conversely, when we build a good foundation, we have good, healthy, happy, and a prosperous life. Each of these 4 cornerstones are sources of prosperity, sources of success, abundance, happiness, and health. The 3rd cornerstone is the realization of co-measurement. The master uses the term co-measurement frequently. Co-measurement is to take no action until you weigh everything possible, every eventuality, and then make a decision to take an action and follow through. That's co-measurement. For example, if you decide to move to another location, from one state or country to another, did you consider the effect that this decision would have on your children, on your pets, your bank, your taxes? It's like when I moved from Florida, there was no state tax in Florida, and there is in Arizona. Did your decision, what kind of decision is the effect going to be on your family members, even your insurance? It's like when I moved from Florida, my car insurance was not accepted in the state of Arizona. Isn't that odd? So if not, we were not taking an action without co-measurement. When I decided to move the headquarters group to Arizona several years ago, it was a result of a vision. Nonetheless, I still had to take many things into consideration before the final decision was made. Many actions had to take place, all requiring co-measurement. Co-measurement is difficult. For example, you are speaking before an audience that has many different viewpoints, many different ages, and different levels of understanding based on their backgrounds and other differences. You still must give a lecture that will not necessarily upset them, but at the same time, you must bring them all to an understanding, right? A central synthesis. Like the central synthesis today is either you have a foundation or a cracked foundation or no foundation at all. Sometimes the subject will go over a person's head. How to avoid this? Try to keep your language simple. Sometimes speakers, presenters, lecturers, teachers, in order to create an image of high intellect, they'll create complex presentations, complex words to make them seem intelligent, but they've lost their audience. Unless the audience has, Alexia or Google there, and they say, Alexia, what does such and such mean? So try to keep your language simple. Also, if such a person is in your audience, try to repeat your points, particularly if there's a language difference. If English, in my case, if English is not their first language, then repeat yourself enough and speak slowly enough, which I tend not to do. Speak slowly enough so that they can comprehend, and their brain has a moment to assimilate, this word into and translate it into their native language. Try to repeat your points so that eventually these points will register in the brain of the person. For example, let's take today's lecture. We could repeat so that the points in this talk will be remembered later on. We must remember to have a foundation to all of our actions. This is another point from today's lecture. We must have a foundation to all of our actions. And this foundation has how many cornerstones? 4. She's awake. Okay. The 4 corners of the foundation are what? Reverence to hierarchy, realization of unity, realization of co-measurement, and application of the canon by thy God. This instruction is given to us by Master M, certainly one we can trust. Master M gives us certain seed thoughts for contemplation to accompany the 4 cornerstones. So for the first cornerstone, the seed thought is the dove. The second cornerstone is warrior. The third cornerstone is pillar. That's for co-measurement, pillar for co-measurement, and the application of the canon by thy God is Son. These 4 seed thoughts will produce great gifts of inspiration and build a foundation for us. So let me move on. I'm running out of time, but I do want to get to the 4th cornerstone. So let me jump down. Application of the canon by thy God. If our thinking, our actions, feelings, and words are in harmony with the will of God, then we have a strong foundation. Application by thy God. The will of God is defined as this. It's not religious. The will of God is not religious. The will of God can be understood by the virtue or the principle of beauty, kindness, freedom, service, humility, and synthesis. So those are 6 terms that reflect the will of God. Not my will, but thine be done. If your actions are not in harmony with these 6 principles, you are not in harmony with the canon. Co-measurement applies to all aspects of life, but above all, we come to our senses and say this. I'm back to co-measurement for a minute here. If I do these things, am I doing them in accordance and in harmony with the will of God? The 4th cornerstone. So see how these 4 cornerstones can work together. If I do these things, whatever the thing is, am I doing them in accordance with the harmony of the will of God? Do you remember that these 7 points, these 6 points will define the will of God? Yes? Then good. And say to yourself, if I do these things, say these things, feel these things, am I doing them in accordance and in harmony with the will of God? If they are not in accordance, then stop yourself. So I'm almost closing here with a Sufi story and then just a little bit more. Here's a Sufi story. A certain conqueror said to Nasruddin, Mullah, all the great rulers of the past had honorific titles with the name of God in them. There was, for instance, God gifted and God accepted and so on. So now, how about some name for me? Give me, Nasruddin, give me some name. God forbid. I just had to put that in this morning. It's just so cute. So the Master M gives us a little more foundation on how to substantiate those 4 corners of the foundation of the action. And this is all right out of Leaves in Moria's Garden. He says, for the affirmation of the first, reverence of hierarchy, evoke all your love, the dove. Evoke all your love. Recall from your childhood the best smiles, the brightest rays of the sun, and the first song of the birds beneath the window. For the second realization of unity, gird yourselves in the armor, warrior, the armor of the day. Take up the weapons of your actions and refresh your perception by a draught of cooling water. For the third realization of co-measurement, select in your workroom, this is the pillar, select in your workroom the longest vertical line and call it the dimensional scale of the plan. Apply mentally all discontents, irritations, and fatigues to the scale of the world plan And upon comparing, you will not find even the smallest place for your illusory booths. And for the fourth, application of the canon by thy God, the Son. Picture to yourself all the boundlessness of the stellar universe. Verily, our Father has many abodes. Which of them shall we stain? Recalling the given canon by thy God, imagine that out of a closed house you are coming into the light. Thus, all that you need will come to you. And then he closes by saying, inscribed upon the first stone is a dove, upon the second stone is a warrior, upon the third is a pillar, and upon the fourth is a sun. And that's from Lisa Maria's Garden, Illumination, page 144 to 145. That's foundation. So hopefully we'll see all of you next Sunday. If not, the following Sunday we'll be back to normal.